Here I am standing outside the new Wembley Stadium in northwest London. It opened in 2007 and it is the largest in the UK with a seating capacity of 90,000. It is home to the English Football Association, and every year in May it hosts the famous FA Cup final. Other sports are also contested here, such as rugby and more recently American football, and it holds concerts for some of the world's biggest music acts. The original stadium was demolished in 2002 along with its famous twin towers, making way for this iconic arch. As well as adding to the aesthetics of the stadium, it also holds the roof up. The first Wembley was built in 1923 for the British Empire exhibition. Just 4 days later, it hosted its first ever FA Cup final between Bolton Wanderers and West Ham United. This was a non-ticket event, and it was estimated that 200,000 people crammed through the turnstiles into a stadium with a capacity of 120,000. This became known as the White Horse Final, after a police horse named Billy restored order as the huge crowd spilled onto the pitch. Wembley has hosted many other major sporting events. In 1948, the world was still recovering from the Second World War, and London hosted the Olympic Games. Wembley was converted into an athletic stadium by putting 800,000 tonnes of cinder over the Greyhound track. This really was the Games of austerity. Athletes were housed in army camps around London. There was no Olympic Village with the luxury that today's athletes take for granted. 1966 was the year that England hosted and won the Football World Cup. The final was played here between England and West Germany, with England winning 4-2. The 11 players on the team sheet that day have all gone down in history, but none more than Geoff Hurst. To this day, he is the only player to score a World Cup hat-trick. Now, the stadium has hosted some bizarre events, one example being in 1975, when Daredevil Evel Knievel appeared here in front of 90,000. His task was to jump over 13 London buses on his motorbike. Everyone gasped as he cleared the jump but failed to land properly, breaking his pelvis and his hand. Wembley has never held an event like this again. The 1980s saw some fantastic concerts, the most important being the Live Aid concert of 1985. This was put together pretty quickly to raise money for the starving in Ethiopia. Acts such as David Bowie, U2 and Dire Straits took to the stage, but the most memorable performance came from Freddie Mercury and Queen. If you have seen the recent film Bohemian Rhapsody, at the end actor Rami Malek eerily recreates Freddie Mercury's electrifying performance. A year later, on the 3rd of August 1986, Wembley hosted its first ever NFL game. This was part of the American Bowl series, where a number of teams played a pre-season game outside of the US for the first ever time. The Chicago Bears beat the Dallas Cowboys 17-6. 31 years later, in 2007, the first ever competitive NFL games to be played outside of North America took place here between the New York Giants and the Miami Dolphins. This has become a yearly event, with at least 2 games per season being played in London. Now, the stadium does offer tours which lets you explore behind the scenes. They last for 90 minutes and you get your own private tour guide. My next talk will be at the All England Lawn Tennis Association, more commonly known as Wimbledon. When you hear the name Wimbledon, rather than thinking of the leafy suburb in southwest London, the sport tennis immediately springs to mind. For 2 weeks every summer, fans flock here in their thousands to watch the giants and minnows of the tennis world compete at the only Grand Slam tournament still to be played on grass courts. Long-standing traditions are still upheld here, which include a strict all-white dress code for the players, and strawberries and cream are served in copious amounts, with spectators consuming 33 tonnes of English strawberries and 10,000 litres of cream every year. The club can trace its origins back to the 19th century. In 1868, the All England Croquet Club was founded. Its grounds were a few miles south from here at Walpole Road. With tennis's popularity growing, the club changed its name to the All England Croquet and Lawn Tennis Club in 1877. The first championships were held that same year, making it the oldest tennis tournament in the world. A gentleman named Spencer Gore won the first tournament from a field of 22 players in front of 200 paying spectators, a far cry from today's 256 male and female competitors and centre court's 15,000 seating capacity. The club outgrew its original site and moved here in 1921, with centre court being built soon after. Today, the championships use 18 of the club's grass courts. Now, British summertime does not always guarantee sunshine and blue skies. Rain has stopped play here on many occasions. To help deal with this issue, centre court had a retractable roof fitted in 2009. 10 years later, the second biggest court, number 1, followed suit. Wimbledon was originally for amateur players, but since 1968 professionals have been included and legends have been born here in SW19. There have been many fierce rivalries in the men's competition. Bjorn Borg and Jimmy Connors battled it out 3 times in the late 1970s, with Borg winning on every occasion. Like Roger Federer, Borg won 5 titles in a row. It would have been 6, but John McEnroe put a stop to that by winning the 1981 final. You cannot be serious! The ladies' event had its own battle in the 1980s between 9-time winner Martina Navratilova and Chris Evert, who only managed 1 title. Navratilova's dominance was ended by Steffi Graf in the late 1980s, who won the tournament 7 times in total. Fred Perry, Billie Jean King, Arthur Ashe, Boris Becker, Venus and Serena Williams, Rafael Nadal, Maria Sharapova, Andy Murray and Novak Djokovic have all triumphed here, and their names have become synonymous with the club. The longest ever game to be played in the history of the sport took place here in a first round match back in 2010 between John Isner and Nicolas Mahut. The match lasted 11 hours and 5 minutes over 3 days, with the final set finishing 70 games to 68 in favour of Isner. The umpire and players were presented with a crystal bowl and champagne flutes as a special recognition for the length of the game. Now, the club has a museum with a virtual reality experience transporting you back in time, as well as your chance to follow in the footsteps of the stars with an unforgettable 90-minute tour of the grounds. My next presentation will be outside the home of Rugby, Twickenham. Twickenham Stadium is the largest dedicated rugby union venue in the world, with a capacity of 82,000. To rugby fans, it is far more than that. It is the game's spiritual home and is a place that has an almost sacred aura. Anyone who plays rugby dreams of playing at Twickenham, and the stadium has become a focal point of history and heritage. Every year it hosts the biggest games in the Rugby Football Union's calendar, including all of England's home matches, domestic cup finals, the varsity match between universities Oxford and Cambridge, and every year the Army and Navy battle it out for bragging rights. It has hosted concerts for Bryan Adams, Rihanna, U2, the Rolling Stones, REM and Lady Gaga, just to name a few. It has also hosted American football as part of the NFL London Games in 2016 and 2017. So the legend goes, in 1823, William Webb Ellis, a pupil at rugby school in the Midlands, picked up the ball during a football match and ran with it. By doing this, he invented the game rugby. The evidence of this actually happening didn't appear in the history books until the end of the 19th century, and many historians have doubted its origins, but the location of this happening is the name of the sport, and the man's name is on the World Cup trophy, the Webb Ellis Cup. The Rugby Football Union, the RFU, was founded on the 26th of January 1871 at the Pall Mall restaurant near Trafalgar Square. 32 members of the London suburban rugby teams met to codify the rules of the game and provide a central governing body. 21 of these teams enrolled and the RFU was born. Just a few months later, the first international took place in Edinburgh between Scotland and England. With the game's popularity growing over the next 30 years and a sellout match at Crystal Palace, the RFU realised the need for their own ground. In 1907, a man named William Williams was charged with the task to find a suitable place to begin construction. He chose this area, which was a market garden that grew cabbages. Fans today still refer to the stadium as the Cabbage Patch. 2 years later, the first game took place between local clubs Richmond and the Harlequins, and on the 15th of January 1910, the first international was played between England and Wales in front of a crowd of 20,000. By the time of the First World War, with all players joining the armed forces, it was used as grazing land for cattle. In 1938, the first ever televised game of rugby was played here between England and Scotland. And during the Second World War, half of the stadium was used to store metal and the other half received injured servicemen. By the 1980s, Twickenham was beginning to look very tired and went through a series of redevelopment programmes. By 1995, the capacity was at 75,000, with the north, east and west stands all being rebuilt. By the end of the 1990s, England manager Sir Clive Woodward had built an exciting team with old heads and young blood, most notably fly half Johnny Wilkinson, who rarely missed a penalty or conversion, and whose last-minute drop goal brought the Rugby World Cup home as England defeated Australia in their own backyard at the 2003 final. This stadium became known as Fortress Twickenham. Between 1999 and 2004, England went on a run of an incredible 23 games without defeat. Ireland put an end to this with a shock win during the Six Nations series. Captain Brian O'Driscoll laid down the gauntlet in the press conference the day before the encounter by promising to undo England in front of their prawn sandwich eating faithful. Now, the stadium today is one of the most state-of-the-art in the world. You can even spend the night here in the 4-star Marriott, which is built into the South Stand. Twickenham also is home to the World Rugby Museum, with 41,000 objects on permanent display, and the stadium tours take you through the ins and outs of the matchday routine, including a pitchside visit. Okay, my next talk will be at the home of cricket, which is Lord's. Apartment blocks and tree-lined streets give you an indication that you are in suburban London, but here you will also find a panorama of paradise, often referred to as the Cathedral of Cricket, Lord's. Although the game has changed over the last 200 years, much has stayed the same, where tradition is paramount. Players who are lucky enough to walk through the pavilion long room and onto the crease have said you can literally feel the history coming off the walls. If you watched any of the archery during the 2012 Olympic Games, then you would have seen Lord's hosting the event with 5,000 spectators seated on the outfield. The first ground, one of three with today's being the third, was just a stone's throw from here at what is now Dorset Square in Marylebone. It opened in May 1787 with the White Conduit Club of Islington asking Thomas Lord to find them an area to play with a nicer clientele. Shortly after moving in, they renamed themselves the Marylebone Cricket Club, the MCC. Because of the rise in rent, Lord removed his turf and relaid it nearby at its second home in 1811. This was short-lived as it lay on the route decided by Parliament for the Regent's Canal. Thomas Lord again picked up his turf and settled on today's site here in St John's Wood, which opened in 1814. It is still owned by the MCC, and Middlesex County Cricket Club play their home matches here. It is also home to the world's oldest sporting museum. Many of the stands were built in the late 20th century, but the main survivor of the Victorian era is the pavilion with its famous long room, which was built in 1890. In each of the dressing rooms are the honours boards, which every top batsman and bowler thrive to get their names on, with Test and One Day international century scorers, as well as bowlers who take 5 wickets in a Test or One Day innings, and 10 in a Test match being honoured. One name that stands out on the honours list is Don Bradman. During his maiden Lord's Test match between England and Australia in 1930, England had scored 425 all out in the first innings, but the magic of Bradman was yet to come. Aged just 21 and batting at number 3, he scored 254 of 376 balls, helping his side make a total of 729 for 6. Later in his autobiography, he wrote, "Practically, without exception, every ball went where it was intended." This record by an overseas batsman stood for just over 70 years before South Africa's Graham Smith hit 259 in 2003. Now, Lord's has seen some historic matches during its 200-plus year history, but last year's World Cup final between England and New Zealand takes some beating in terms of nail-biting finales. With the match dramatically tied at 248 runs each, the game was to be decided with a super over. England went into bat first and scored 15 runs. New Zealand needed just 16 to win. With the final ball, they needed just 2 runs. England bowler Jofra Archer delivered to Martin Guptill, whose shot clipped off his pad leg side. He goes for the second run, which would win them the game. Jason Roy of England fires in a stunning throw to wicketkeeper Jos Buttler, who breaks the stumps with Guptill short of the ground. With the super over tied at 15 runs each, England won by a virtue of having scored more boundaries, a rule cricket lawmakers thought would never be used. Now, tours of the stadium are led by an expert guide, which includes the Grade 2 listed pavilion with the legendary long room, the players' dressing rooms, and a visit to the MCC Museum, home to the iconic Ashes urn. You can also book afternoon tea, which takes place in the long room with a selection of handcrafted treats.